Hello, friends, listeners, viewers, and anybody that is enjoying the work item. It's another time for another episode, and I have a wonderful guest. As you know from all our intros, all our guests are wonderful, but today we have a special guest, Simon Guest, the CTO of Code.org. Welcome, Simon.
Hi, Dan. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
I know that there's a lot of topics we wanted to discuss based on our earlier conversation, but I want to start with the fundamental question that I think it's maybe interesting to level set because you are a CTO. That's a very notable position. And you're at a big, well-known organization like Code.org. But maybe you can tell us more about what were your engineering roots? What got you to where you are today?
Yeah, no, that's a great question to start with. So, as you can probably tell by the accent, this is not a native Seattle accent, although I try. So, I was born and raised in the UK. Studied there, studied software engineering after high school. I went on to get a master's degree in IT security, of all things. We can definitely go deeper into that if you'd like. And then I was doing some consulting in the UK and was doing a joint project with a customer in the UK and Microsoft at the time. And that project went relatively well, and that gave me the opportunity to move across to the US. Wow, probably around 25 years ago now. Um, I ended up joining Microsoft in 2001 in a couple of different teams. Ended up moving into engineering management and getting my first team. Wow, that would have probably been about 2005. And have gone through different organizations since. I spent about 10 years at Microsoft. I did a few years at a consulting company down in Irvine, most of whom were ex Microsoft employees at the time. I spent a few years at Concur, if you've used Concur for travel and expense management. Hopefully, that was a good experience. I spent 4 years at Amazon in a couple of different groups and then landed at Code.org also about 4 years ago as well. So one of the trajectories I've certainly gone through over the past 25 to 30 years is kind of trying something new around kind of that 3 to 4 year mark. That might have been at the same organization as well. But what I found is that gives me the opportunity to switch things up, learn new things, but not do it too often. So 3 to 4 years, you can still get a lot done. You can feel like you've made an impact, and then you're kind of ready for something new, or at least that's how it has been for me.
So you've jumped around organizations with, I want to say, like vastly different cultures, like between Microsoft, Amazon, consulting. I would imagine it's a bit of a jarring transition going from one to the other.
Yeah, I mean there was definitely a lot of similarities. Obviously, being in the tech space, leading engineering teams at all of those, there's obviously many similarities in terms of how you operate day to day and the kind of expectations. There's definitely a lot of cultural differences. I think going from Microsoft to a small consulting company, we were about like 200 at the time. I think one of the differences was having to give up a lot of the systems that were kind of at Microsoft that you kind of got used to that did everything for you, and kind of being on your own and creating systems from scratch for the most part was quite interesting. And then also moving from Amazon to a non-profit was also an interesting experience. Again, a lot of similarities. Again, just being in the tech space, developing software, but certainly not only do you have like a massive difference in the organization size, but also a lot of nuances about being at a non-profit. A good example is hiring. So obviously, non-profit, you live off raised funds and from our kind donors and supporters. But that's obviously a very different perspective when it comes to hiring engineers versus the types of salary and other perks and stock and other things that you can offer at larger organizations.
I love the distinction. And also, I'm curious because you talked early on about that you focus on IT security and you got a master's degree in that. Was your role kind of transition, the hops that you made in any way, shape, or form related to security? Or why did you explore security as a field?
Yeah, so it was a field I was really, really passionate about and still am to some degree, certainly early on in my career. And after the consulting company I was working at in the UK, I was actually leading their kind of security practice at the time. So this fit very, very much with the work that I was doing then. Um, After a few years in the field, however, it's I don't know how to describe this well, but working in security is almost like a zero sum game, and you can only prevent bad things from happening. And I think what I missed is that creative element. It's like, okay, what am I creating here? When you create a piece of software, you've got something, you've got a product that you can show and share with your customers. If you're working in a 100% security space, that's a little different. So that was a large part for the transition in terms of okay, well, what does a more creative side looking like, and that started the path with Microsoft at the time. Now, even to this day, the foundation in security has been immensely helpful. So obviously, security is a much bigger field today than it was 20 something years ago. So keeping on top of that, understanding like threat models, different attack vectors, and things that conceptually I learned 20 years ago are still very, very relevant. And even at Amazon, I was ended up doing a lot of work in one of the teams that involved some cryptography as well. That I was able to draw on some of that experience. So it was not wasted in the slightest. It remains something that's still super valuable.
So there's a desire for creative work, the creativity of the job, and then desire to, I guess, not be comfortable because you're making all these transitions, all these jumps every once in a while, and they seem like complementary traits, if I get the vibe correctly here.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think this has been an important factor for me. These 3 to 4 years, part of this is okay. How do I take myself out of this comfort zone? And look, I could have still been at Microsoft. I could have probably been very, very happy today doing a very similar role to what I was doing in the early 2000s. And I'm sure that would have been very successful. But I think for me, at least every 3, 4, 5 years, it's like, okay, what don't I know? And part of that is it's uncomfortable. It's taking yourself out of that comfort zone, going to maybe a new team or a new organization or a new environment, and having to learn a lot of things from scratch. And there's definitely a pain associated with that. There's the first few months. I remember my first few months at Amazon. It's such a different culture that the first 3 to 6 months, I'm like, wow, what am I doing here? And is this really the right place for me? It took a few months to get really aligned with understanding how the culture was different. Um, but these have been tremendous growth opportunities, certainly for me in my career as well. And I've learned so much from the transitional periods in each of these.
You're kind of kind of presenting the opposite of a common trope that exists in the tech industry, and that is, it's kind of well known that for folks that want to grow their careers and want to kind of achieve new levels, the advice, at least for the past few years before kind of the current economic climate, was switch jobs. It's like the fastest way for you to grow careers is every 2 years you go to a different role at a different company, and that's the fastest way to get promoted. The challenge with that comes that only works up until a certain level, right? Like if you're fresh out of college, then yes, jumping every 2 years is going to get you to a certain, title, if you will. But at some point, you're going to hit that wall where, okay, but now you can't just jump companies and become CTO all of a sudden because before that you were like a staff engineer. You are presenting kind of a counterexample to that you did make those jumps, you did make those transitions, and in the process did grow your career fairly significantly, right? Because you were an engineering lead, you were a distinguished engineer. So you kind of have this background to prove that this is possible. Tell me more about what was your strategy there career-wise?
Yeah, did I have a strategy? That's probably the first question to go after. Or was it just luck? Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So there's definitely occasions that after 18 months, 2 years, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm done here. This isn't working out. And I held on for the 3 to 4 years. So yes, while I support kind of moving around as a way to grow, I do. And again, this is personal. Definitely many listeners may have different time frames in their own head. But for me, if I could kind of draw this, it's almost like a sigmoid. It's like you kind of on ramp, you learn immediately, you get into a really good pace. Probably around year 2, you're kind of really acclimatized, you're delivering, or your teams are delivering. And then for me, around the end of year 3 or 4, it kind of tails out. It's like, well, I'm still doing good work, I'm still enjoying it. Um, but maybe there's something else here. What else am I missing? And again, I think the key here is also not to get to the point where you're not enjoying something. I think that's super important, and it's again, this is part of the pain of transitioning, because many teams I've left behind, I'm like, I'm really sad to leave this team behind. I've hired most of them. I've got a great rapport with them. We're delivering some great stuff. It's so tempting to say, well, I'll just stick here for another year or 2 years or 5 years. So there is a pain element to that in both leaving and joining somewhere new, and obviously risk associated as part of that. I think one of the other interesting aspects, certainly of what I've gone through during my career, is this balance between technical leadership and people leadership. And I think it's easy-ish potentially to get into your first management role or first leadership role, and then completely kind of divorce yourself from the technical details, or abstract yourself to a level where that really doesn't make sense. And what I've tried to do is have this equilibrium between technical understanding and knowledge and leadership, and people leadership at the same time, which doesn't come easy by any respect. And no, I don't write code. I don't check in code into mainline anymore. But I am keeping up. I am writing prototypes. I'm trying to lead from a viewpoint of technical leadership, which I think has also helped some of those transitions between senior kind of IC small teams and then organizations of, I don't know, 150, 200 kind of engineers.
Now, because it's 2025, the question is, are you vibe coding? Is that a thing for you?
We could spend all podcasts on this, I think. So yes and no. So I've definitely got a bunch of prototypes. I definitely got full on the vibe coding train with Windsurf at the time was my idea of choice. Got developing some prototypes, and was super happy with the results until it started not working. And then it's like, oh, hang on. The model is no longer understanding the context because it's been through so much. And then as I start to peel away the code underneath, I'm like, okay, well, this doesn't make sense, and I would have never have written it this way had I known. So I've started to pull that back a bit, and kind of where I've landed, again, this may change over the next few months as well, is using Klein with OpenRouter, and having kind of reliance on a model in terms of helping me with code, but also being a lot more judgmental in terms of, okay, what did it create? Let's do this one step at a time. Let's not go off the rails and just let this thing loose. And that seems to be, again, right now, a fairly good balance.
So it's half vibe coding. I
It
like
is.
that. I think it works, and I think that's you still kind of have to understand the systems underneath it, right? It's just you can only vibe code yourself to a solution so far, because at some point things will start breaking, things will start not working as they should. Like I've experienced that a couple of times where I try to get some complex code around like caching, and you tell the models that go and figure out this property, and it starts writing like a bunch of boilerplate code, and it's like, no, the cache thing is that there's a shortcut for it. But then you have to know it. Like, you have to be familiar enough to know that this exists and not just rely on the fact that the model is going to spit out everything for you.
Yes. And I think there's a couple of things here. Number one is knowing your own weaknesses and knowing where models can help. I'm very weak on CSS.
Me too. For the record, I don't like writing CSS. I'm not a good web developer.
Right. So I understand the structural elements of web development, and I know in my head how I want this laid out, and I start from a base layout and a set of components and a set of subcomponents. So that I want to be in control of. But the CSS for that particular component and what the margin is and how the padding works and the media queries, I'm more than happy to leave that to a model that knows way more than I do here. So I think just finding the right balance between how the control that I want in these environments and what I'm expecting and want from the model, I think is super important. And then I think the second interesting point, coming back to code.org, is, okay, what does this look like for students who are learning coding today? Should students learn to code in the face of the just how prolific some of these models are getting and how good they are? And I think we're still working this out as an industry. I don't know whether we've landed there. My personal opinion is yes, students still need to code. There's obviously things like computational thinking that remains so important, learning to code. Again, as you mentioned, when things break, you really want to go underneath and you want to say, okay, well, what's going on here? And have that ability to go understand. So I think it is still important. It will remain important. But I think some of the balance between skills writing code versus skills reading and understanding code, I think it could be really interesting to see the shifts in the curriculum that might happen in the coming years.
I think that's good framing, because I did hear exactly what you're talking about. And there's this hesitation about, like, well, should I even get a computer science degree now? Because AI can do this. And if AI can do this and what we have now, in 5 years, it might do it even better. And it's true to an extent. At least, I don't know. I don't have any, crystal ball that I can look into and say that this is going to be the future, but it seems like the power of AI is just another level of abstraction, right? The same way we don't expect everybody to know how to write assembler code, which that's fine. Like, you don't need to write binary or ASM x86 to be able to write computer programs. Now you can just write in C# or Python with all sorts of frameworks. And this might just be that, where you end up with another layer of abstraction where it allows you to go faster and deliver more things, and the models will get better. But ultimately, do I think that is going to completely eliminate the need for computer scientists or engineers? Like, I don't think so. I think there's, if you have critical systems, if you have anything that requires maintenance, like, I mean, think about the complexity of an operating system like Linux, Windows, Mac OS. Like, there's so many moving parts that I just don't see qualified engineers just being completely eliminated from the equation and saying, no, it's entirely now written by AI.
I 100% agree with that. I think that's the way that you put this in terms of raising the abstraction is I think spot on. And I think this is also, there's an opportunity here as well, because you can say, okay, well, what don't I need to do anymore? Well, maybe I don't need to memorize all of the syntax in this framework. Where before it was in the back of my head and I was like,
Like
oh yeah,
CSS.
well, exactly.
Well, one example, like I like one of the things, like I had, like, exactly what it clicked with me when you said that you have an idea in your head. And I had the exact same experience when I'm trying to create some web experience. I was like, I know I want this kind of gradient and I want it to kind of flow this way. I'm not entirely sure how to do this because I'm not a CSS. Like, I like desktop development and Python, but like, if you put me in front of CSS, I was like, I kind of know what it is. But instead of me going and Googling for half an hour to land on it, I can just ask the model and be like, here's all the properties that you want. And then I can tweak it and the way I want to get it to.
Yes, no, that's spot on. And then I think by not having to remember this, it frees up brain space for other things.
Right. Creative work. Actual creative work.
Exactly. Yes.
You are a hands-on engineer. So from the very beginning, you kind of follow the engineering track. And then at some point, you decided to transition into engineering leadership. And we're, for folks listening, like we're scaling back a little bit to career again instead of talking about AI. So you went to the engineering leadership track, and it's specifically through engineering management, and now you're CTO, which is kind of the pinnacle of that engineering management career track. What led you to the decision that you actually want to manage people and manage organizations? Because again, the dilemma for somebody listening to this could be like, well, should I be an IC, which can be a lucrative career path, but oftentimes the path to more like engineering management, engineering leadership, and especially the C-suite leadership is a little bit more opaque. Like it's unclear what's required to get there, or should I even think about getting there? What was it like for you?
Yeah, so I love this question because I often turn this question and use it for ICs and engineers that I speak with who want to become into engineering management. And typically for me, and what I also look for when I ask this question is kind of two things. Um, Number one is, does this individual have a need to scale their ideas? So one of the things I was finding in my early years at Microsoft is I had so many ideas in my head, but I only had so many hours in the day. And part of this was like, wow, okay, if I had a team or I had other people working with me, this would give me the scale that I could do so much more and kind of scale kind of outwards. The second super important thing for me, and again, the question that I asked is okay, do you enjoy coaching other people and seeing them grow? So it's really for me about two things. It's about scaling ideas and then coaching other people and seeing them grow. For me, it was never about the title. It was never about, oh well, there's a different path here that might be more lucrative or whatever. That there's a side effect, if anything else, but it should never be the driving function. And where I have seen others who have used that as the driving function, it's always turned out badly. It's like 6 months in, 12 months in, they're unhappy, their team's unhappy, it's not working out. Okay.
And these are the folks that want to basically say, like, oh, I want to be a director. And then they just do basically like a checklist to get to the director stage.
Exactly. So never use title, never use, oh my gosh, I want to get to this level as the main impetus, because I think that'll just end badly. So certainly early on, scaling ideas and helping other people grow were the core of it. Now, one of the interesting things as kind of my organizations got larger in kind of scope, and I had like manager of managers and even multiple functions, it started to kind of bring out the need for skills that I didn't necessarily have. So I remember early on, I forget, I think this was joining Concur and taking over an organization, and I had like my first budgeting meeting, and this was very new to me. And I had like the finance business partner would walk in. They had all of the budget for the organization that I was inheriting, and this was like tens of millions of dollars. I was like, wow, okay, this looks good. What do I do with this? So I think kind of midway through, as my organizations got bigger, what I tried to do and what I tried to recommend is kind of complementing or building up your team with the expertise that you don't necessarily bring in. For me, I ended up hiring like a contract accountant just to help me fill in some of the budget gaps that I had. I was also very keen to get a really good relationship with our people management business partner as well. So I think it's, as your organizations get bigger, it's kind of a case of understanding the skills that you don't bring or the background that you don't bring, and then having to kind of make sure that those are accurately covered.
You called out something that I think a lot of people miss is when you get into these leadership roles, the skill set and the things you need to worry about and things you need to think about are vastly different than what you would have when you're in an IC role or a role that doesn't require you to have this high up of a kind of position, if you will. things like budgeting, right? Like you called out one of those things because I know for a fact that a lot of people that I talk to, when they think about technical leadership, like a CTO, the thing that kind of is front and center is like, oh, I get to make decisions. I get to make architectural calls on how things should be created and what cloud provider we should be using and how this microservice architecture should be laid out. But it's not just that, right? You have to now think about the business. And that means now you're involved in budgeting conversations. You're involved into the hiring conversation, the firing conversations, and all these things. Like, it's not of interest to everybody. I can tell you that.
Right. Yes. Yeah, you end up living through those. And there are great learning opportunities with all of those, of course. Managing a multi-million dollar budget is something else. Obviously, managing underperforming employees and having them removed from the organization, as painful as it is also another interesting learning opportunity. But you're right. It's certainly, and this was true for myself when I first conceptualized, okay, what does senior technical management or CTO role look like? It was the former. It was the cool stuff. It was like, I'm going to set the strategy, and I'm going to be, I know, writing these cool docs or prototypes, and it's going to guide the direction. And one of the ways I've thought about this, so when I first, I think this was, I first joined Code.org, one of my peers in the executive team asked me, well, what does a CTO do? And this was a valid question because they had not worked with one before. And I came up with kind of, if you imagine like a 2x2 matrix, and the columns of the matrix are technical and business or business slash people. And then the rows of the matrix are near term and long term. So you've got this 2x2, four squares. And a lot of my role and a lot of my day and week and month is bobbing across between these four squares. So it's like, hey, we've got a live site issue and something's broken on our deployment. Well, that's short-term technical. It's like, how do we get this fixed? Who do we need to, what customers do we need to inform? What's the right strategy here? And then there might be a planning meeting for budget next year. Well, that's longer term business. So then I've got to switch into budget mode. And then maybe an employee decides they want to leave. Well, that's short term people or short term business. So that's really helped me kind of describe to others how this role kind of looks and the balance between the areas. But it's also a really good forcing function for saying, hey, I've not really spent a lot of time recently in the long-term technical planning. Maybe I need to kind of step up and be more proactive here, or whatever side of the quadrant is needing some attention at the time.
In terms of skill sets, it does sound like you need to be a bit of a generalist. You can't really specialize in just one thing and say, oh, I am the CTO that knows everything about our Kubernetes cluster. And that's what I'm going to be kind of narrowed in. Your responsibilities basically span whatever the organization might need and the kind of span of control of a CTO. It's not, you can't just say, pick one area and say, I'm going to be the expert in that. Now you have to be a bit better at all of them, which leads to my question. How do you develop the skill set? Because you need to be good at all of them. You can't be a CTO that is, I'm really good at technical, but absolutely terrible at budgeting because, like, well, you kind of need both. How do you know what level of skill you need for each of those domains to be excelling at your job?
Wow, that's just such a good question. I think there's a few parts to this. So just on the technical part, that is itself is its own domain, and especially based on what your background is going into these types of roles, it could be, hey, I come from an infrastructure role, or I come from an app dev role. So there's always gaps. One of the things I tried to do early in my career, which has served me well, and this was very early on, the first few years of being an engineer, is to try and get exposure to as many different technologies as possible. And this was back in like Unix admin days and networking, and I know I was writing some scripting. I did some C++. And what that did is it just gave me a really good breadth of different technologies for probably the first 4 to 5 years of my career. And then it was only then that I started to kind of dive into specific areas. But that has still helped me even to today. I'll look at a particular tech stack and I won't know it, of course, so I won't have the depth of it, but the foundations and the fundamentals are much easier to pick up because of that breadth. And then you're right, you've got all of these new areas that are completely new to you. It might be budgeting, it could be, I know, HR, people management. It could even be just the mechanics of interacting with other C levels or other execs. One of the things I had to overcome early on was just adapting a lot of my communication style. Because maybe you and I are having a conversation, let's say, I don't know, let's pick a topic, technical debt. So we're having a conversation about technical debt. I'm going to launch into a bunch of details and what we want to do, and this is the plan, and this is the roadmap, and you're going to be like, yeah, sounds cool. When I have to present our plan for technical debt to a COO or to someone who doesn't come from a technical background, that's a whole different set of communication skills. So a large part of that is just understanding, okay, what framing am I going to put around this? What story am I going to build around it? And then what are my and this other person's objectives from this? What are we hoping to get from this? So anyway, there's a bunch of communications. I think to come back and answer your original question, two things: curiosity and humility. So curiosity, I don't. There's a massive broad area, and I see gaps, and I'm like, okay, how do I at least address this? So that could be anything. That could be reading, research, speaking to others, going to a conference about a tech I've never seen before. But I'm constantly trying to identify, wow, I don't know this. I saw an interesting report about it. I want to know enough, and then I can move on. So having that curiosity, I think, is super, what has been super important. And then I think, secondly, just humility. It's like, look, I'll go in and, hey, I've never done budget before. I don't know what I'm doing. And then having the right people, because, oh, okay, well, we didn't know that. Let me walk you through the process. And what does a quarter look like? And what do we have to report to the board? And how does this look like? You'll often, it feels like an awkward moment because you're admitting something that you should do because you've got the title.
That's the stereotype, right? It's like if you reach that level, you know everything.
Of course, it's like, why do you know that? You fear the worst, but by having that level of humility, it often brings out the best in people, and they're like, oh wow, okay, yeah, sure, let's sit down and we'll spend an hour, and I'll walk you through this. I'm more than happy to do that.
I also really enjoy the framing that you had here around what I would classify as like foundational skills. Like there's skills that you can acquire with time, and you can read books, you can write code, you can read, the P&L sheets and all that fun stuff that comes with it. But also there's like curiosity and humility. To me, those are the foundational pieces that kind of underpin a lot of the work. Are there any other skills that you would say are foundational in nature to you, where it's like I can learn a lot of other things, but these are the kind of the cornerstone that is required, the foundation that is required?
So I think curiosity is one of those for sure. I think two more, communication I kind of touched on, but we can go a little deeper on those. The ability to adjust communication style and to understand communication has been I think fundamental to kind of growing through and doing different elements of or different roles in my career. And this could be, of course, as I mentioned, kind of sharing or details with execs. But certainly early on, I remember having a great mentor at Microsoft. My presentations were not good. They were horrible. In fact, they were in the weeds. I didn't know who my audience was. They were boring. The slides looked horrible. So I really invested with the assistance of a phenomenal mentor at the time, who really showed me what I was doing wrong, took me through so much that has been so fundamental to the way that I present today, even if it's not a slide deck. Just presenting in front of an audience or in front of a group, that has been like a bedrock that has stayed with me. And then likewise on the communication side, my writing was also awful. Probably still is to some degree. I come from an engineering background. I come from a math background. That's my language, and especially at Amazon, just given the writing culture there.
6 pagers, 6 pagers. I
The
remember
pages,
that. The
character key,
WBRs.
exactly. And what was kind of funny there as well. So at Microsoft, I used to be the editor in chief of a magazine called the Architecture Journal. Relatively popular one. It's kind of architecture level kind of articles that we used to curate from the organization. So I came into this Amazon role. I was like, well, I was editor in chief. Of course, I know how to write. And um, they take you through a boot camp, like a writing boot camp, as part of your orientation, and you have to write like a two-pager. So I wrote this two-pager. I submitted it. I was like, yeah, I think you'll find that's pretty good. And I got it back. It was a bloodbath of reading. This thing. It had scribbles everywhere. One of the first comments was, by the end of paragraph 1, I could tell you were English because you were always writing in the passive voice. So anyway, that was again just this kind of reset of, wow, okay, maybe I really need to adjust, and from there I ended up investing a lot into learning more about writing. So anyway, communication, I think, is one of those three pillars together with curiosity. And then a third is coordination. I think the types of, so being a CTO or being any engineering manager or leader, I think, especially when you think of that quadrant, you're pulled in all kinds of different directions every day. It's like, oh, there's a Slack that I need to do X, Y, and Z, and then someone's complaining about this. I need to go over here, and then something's crashed on their site. I need to look over there. So how you coordinate that and how you stay on top of everything and reprioritize and think about just what's so important is pretty much a kind of foundational skill. And I would argue it is in every role. You need to have to-do lists and figure out what you need to do. But I think more, especially as you progress into more people management roles and you're kind of spread more thinly or horizontally versus deep in the subject, the more that demands on you in terms of, hey, I'm meeting with Dan. We've got 30 minutes. We're going to talk about website improvements. What's important? What should we prioritize? And when we're going to get it done by? It's that kind of pivot that you need to make so many times throughout the day.
Context switching. That's another skill.
Exactly.
Be effective while context switching is hard. From experience, boy, when you start jumping around, you have a budget meeting at 9 a.m. and then 10 a.m. is going to be an architecture review, and you're like, your brain needs to be like rewired in the moment for it. Yeah, it's tough, but it needs to be done. And I'm curious from your perspective, a lot of these skills, right? Like the assumption is for you to be able to jump these levels, for you to be able to grow into these roles, people above you should be able to spot the fact that, like, oh, Simon is great at this already, right? Because the common trope is that you get promoted once you start operating at that next level. It's not that you're going to be a good potential for that. No. You're operating at the level of staff or principal or distinguished engineer or whatever that might be. How do you how did you know that, okay, these are the skills that I need to develop to be able to make that next hop?
Looking back, it's really easy, these types of things, to look back, retrospect, and say, oh my gosh, well, of course I needed to do X, Y, and Z, and then that got me to the next level. While you're in the moment, though, I don't know whether it's luck or whatever, but that's not quite as apparent. I think one of the things that enabled that, however, as I think about the various jumps throughout my own career, is, again, it kind of comes down to these 3 to 4 year blocks for me. I'm always thinking, or at least so throughout, let's say halfway through these 4 year blocks, I'm often thinking about, well, what does that next role look like for me? I'm not ready to leave. I'm enjoying it. But where do I want to go next? And I don't have an employer in mind. I don't really have anything else, any of the details worked out. But I kind of know what I'm hoping to get out of that role. And then that helps, of course. And then half of me, especially towards the end of these kind of 3 to 4 year blocks, is also, okay, are there things that I can be doing in today's job where I'm emulating that, if that makes sense? So, I know, good example, when I transitioned from like having a team, so just being a manager to a manager of managers, I knew that that was something I was interested in exploring. Um, but I was like, okay, well, what kind of things can I start to do that are going to help me in that position? So a lot of that was obviously asking other functional leaders, okay, well, what's the difference here, and what does your day job look like, and what are the things that you do that I'm not doing? I think I pseudo inherited like another team on the side. It wasn't quite official, but it kind of gave me that experience. So I think, yeah, kind of combination of thinking ahead plus trying to do the job ahead of time, but not telling anyone. It's kind of what worked.
From the perspective of somebody that is in the role in the moment, how did you, well, plan out? I want to say like, or maybe that's not the right term because planning out for this is hard. Were you aspiring to reach certain levels? And we talked at the very beginning, the title is not the goal. Nonetheless, people do care about being promoted and recognized for the work that they do. They want to be recognized for the scope of impact that they have in their organization. How did you come along to these roles like, oh, now I can be a director, or now I can be the signature engineer, now I can be a CTO? Like, were there any champions for you that would advocate on your behalf? Was it your own initiative, or you would push yourself to conversations with other executives and say, like, hey, like, I'm ready? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, thinking back, and maybe this is a British trait. I never really advocated for myself. This was not a case of, hey, I'm going to meet with the SVP and say what a great leader I am, and do all that thing. That feels very very foreign to me. So I don't recommend that either. Um, so I think a lot of it was others recognizing the potential in me and being very fortunate to have a set of managers and directors and VPs at the time who were very invested in my success. Was super helpful. Um, and and them, I think, recognizing, and again, this combination of me kind of pseudo trying to do the next role, I think kind of helps because then like, oh, okay, well, I can see what you're trying to do here. Let's talk about opportunities that might not be here today, but maybe in like a year or two. And I remember lots of those different conversations as well. One of the other interesting angles is that this is not necessarily a linear path in terms of growth as well. And it looks like it. You can go to my LinkedIn or my resume and you can say, oh, wow, you started off as an IC and now you're CTO. That's like linear. That's certainly not the case. And to give you a good point, if you were to trace my organization size from 20 years ago to today, it looks like an inverted bell curve. And it starts off as one, got my first team, got manager of managers, director, so on and so forth. And it kind of peaked out around 200 or so, kind of an organization size of 200 or so. And at that point, I definitely had lots of opportunities and pathways to make that even larger. I could go to 500 or 1,000, or I don't know, maybe CTO of a big bank somewhere, had I kind of done the exploration. But what I also recognized coming back to this technical balance is I wasn't super happy. That didn't feel like a super happy path to me going that direction. And I remember having an organization of 200, and some weeks, it was an exhausting week because you spent all of it in budget and fire drills and a bunch of other things that come with managing a large organization. There was no time for any IC or prototype work because it was all hands on deck, kind of putting out these fires. And then my wife at the end of the week would be like, "Well, what did you do this week?" I'm like, "I'm not sure. I'm really not sure." So around that time, I made a deliberate path to say I still want to elevate in terms of the scope and impact that I'm doing, but I actually want a smaller org size. And now I'm down to like about 40 is the engineering size at code.org. And who knows what that will be next, whatever my next move is. But that's also an interesting reflection, is knowing kind of where you are in that journey, and just checking in, and are you happy with that? And is this, it doesn't have to be a linear path. It can be, there can be variations to this.
So self-reflection is still important.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Every day.
Let's think a little bit about the future here. And we touched on some of the aspects of AI and the future of dev careers. What do you think can students do today, folks that aspire to break into the tech field in some capacity? What can they do to build a moat, a differentiator for themselves, a differentiator for their careers that can set them apart when AI commoditizes a lot of the, I want to say, I don't know if it's too derogatory, like grunt work, basically, for the, we all have seen like folks that like, oh, to get started, just build a bunch of CRUD apps and throw them on GitHub and that's your portfolio. Like
No,
long term, like I don't think that's gonna work anymore. I just cannot see some random websites on GitHub classifying as, oh, this is exceptional. So what can they do? What can they do to be successful in this era of a lot of these skills become commodity?
yes. And I think there's obviously AI that has a big impact here as well. There's also obviously the changes we've seen with the changes in zero interest rate policy and everything we've seen financially happen over the past 3 years that makes it a very different market today than what it used to be. 4 or 5 years ago, you could have your CS grad, you come out with your degree, and you'd land probably a pretty good job pretty much quickly anywhere, and people will pay you a lot of money for it. That's not necessarily the case today because of these kind of impending factors. And to share a quick story, we had, I think this was either last summer or the summer before last. We normally have a couple of intern positions at code.org. They're just summer interns, kind of temporary work. Anyway, we posted this on the job site, and I think within the first week we got 800 different applications
Wow.
from CS grads.
800.
800. I think we had it for a week. We had to close the position because it's like, well, now how are we going to review these things? And there was a bunch of noise in there. Don't get me wrong. So, but even if you cut that in half, we still ended up with 400 really good CS grads, and these were great schools, people with great GPAs, and we're like, wow, how do we choose between them? We've got two positions here. What does this look like? And I think one of the things that I personally look for is it's kind of taking a step back and saying, well, look, you've got your degree. That's table stakes for being able to submit your resume. So yes, you got a degree from wherever, whichever school. Congratulations. What else have you been doing? And what else have you been doing, especially as side projects that show and demonstrate your passion for whatever you are passionate in? And the resumes and the applications that stood out were not the ones that had, oh, on GitHub, here's a CRUD app, here's my to-do list that I did in my degree course. It's like, well, sure, everyone did that. It was instead the ones that like, hey, there's a really interesting itch that I wanted to scratch here, or there was a side hobby or side project or a social problem that I was trying to solve. And here's something on GitHub that you can look at, and that shows how I went about it, and I'm still actively contributing to it. And from there, you could go obviously dig in. Was it the best code? No. Obviously, this person's still early in their career, but you can see the enthusiasm, the passion, and how they've drawn on what they learned in their CS grad to make it better and kind of continue that. So it's that kind of, I don't know how to put that into words, but that kind of spark or that kind of initiative that does set you apart. And I think GitHub portfolio is a wonderful place to do that.
Yeah, and especially, I thought about this for a bit and thought like, well, if a lot of this AI and large language models commoditize a lot of these skills, and we have now agentic workflows where you can literally go into VS Code and say, build me a website that does this. And then you throw it on a GitHub and say, hey, look what I made, right? Um, and I thought for a second, it's like, well, wouldn't that be considered kind of like cheating at this? And the conclusion that I arrived to is that not really. And the reason for that, and I'm curious if you kind of match the same understanding here, but to me, it's like what you just alluded to is that spark of I know of a problem. I want to solve that problem. I will use the tools at my disposal. I'll use AI. I'll use some, maybe I'll go and commission some graphic design for this and, modify the whatever. But at the end of the day, you're solving a problem. And I think that creativity of I actually arrived at a solution that helped me do X, Y, and Z, whatever that might be. But, it could be maybe you're building a little SaaS business, maybe you're building a website where folks can share their, bread recipes or something like that. But you have that kind of desire to like, I want to solve this problem, and you're looking at that creativity. It's the same way, like you wouldn't punish somebody for like when they're doing their job and you're like, oh, you're Googling for how this API call is structured.
Right.
Well, yeah, of course. But I have a problem that I want to solve. At the end of the day, I don't really care about the API itself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. It really is. It's trying to dig into that creativity and what is motivating for this person and how are they acting upon that motivation. And sure, they could use AI tools. I don't. Again, the quality of the code underneath, especially kind of a graduating maybe into like an internship or a first an Eng 1 role is not really what we're looking for. It's really about, okay, you had this idea, you've built something, and often there's follow through with that as well. I remember one of the candidates that had built something, and then they were going to several schools in India and trying this thing out, and again trying to solve this problem. And it's like, okay, that's so unique. That is not a case of, hey, I just finished my grad in July, or my degree in July. It's September now. I haven't really done much over the summer, but here's a resume. Okay, sure.
I like the fact that a lot of companies now, in terms of engineering interviews, even adopted the practice of, oh, sure, you can use ChatGPT, no problem. But explain your thinking, explain what you're doing, show me the fact that you can copy that code, you know exactly where to put it, how to modify it, right? Like you're looking at problem solving skills, not necessarily just the rote memorization of like, oh, I know exactly what the string function should be, because you'll figure that out. Like we all have access to internet nowadays.
Yes, yeah. I know. Doing a binary tree or something. It's like, okay, what are you going to learn from that? It's
Unless you work at a company that really cares about optimizing those workflows, and sure,
sure.
then interview for binary trees. I want to wrap up the show on a question that I ask of all my guests. For somebody that listens to this and they are inspired by your story and they want to follow in your footsteps, what's one piece of unconventional advice that you would share with them from you?
There's a few things that come to mind here. I think the one I want to share. So there's this concept that's popular in many Eastern religions. It's called impermanence. And impermanence, it's the understanding that everything is temporary. So nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. Um, and we hear this a lot. It's like, oh, everything's temporary. You kind of brush it off. But I think for me, and one of the advice I give to all of the listeners is thinking about how you can accept this and almost find joy in it. So I hate to say it, but you, me, this podcast, this office, we're all temporary to some
Oh, yeah,
degree
absolutely.
on some timeline. And I think just really thinking about that and accepting it, especially as you kind of navigating a career, changes, or certainly hasn't for me changed the way I think about things. And again, it's like, okay, well, is this project really important? Or I don't want to discourage people doing hard work. That's not the key. But trying to factor in impermanence as a part of like someone's life and career journey. So examples, taking care of yourself. I think comes to mind, or maybe spending some time with the kids. I've got kids who are now graduating this year, and I was fortunate to invest a lot of time in terms of coaching them, both classes and coaching soccer and a bunch of things, which are super hard at the time, trying to juggle schedules. But it's something now that I look back and I'm like, I'm so thankful that I did that, because I will never get that time back. So anyway, I think that would be it. It's kind of to maybe think deeply about the impermanence of life, and see what that means for everyone and their career.
I like that. And I like that also because it begs the question for a lot of the conversations that we have is like, is this really the hill I want to die on? Because folks love to argue about a lot of details, and oftentimes just worth stepping back and saying, in 6 months, is this going to matter?
Exactly.
Like I've been in engineering meetings where people argue about a position of a button for like in this like theory conversation of like, no, it absolutely needs to be on the right and then this format. And it's like, or in a year when a new engineer is going to come in and they're going to change it anyway. Like, does it really matter that much? Probably not.
Or maybe the software doesn't even exist. The
Or
software's
it
been
doesn't
dead.
exist. Yeah. And it's one of those things like you're absolutely right. Like everything will change. Your product will change, your websites, your decisions, your specs, your RFCs, whatever you're writing, it's not going to be the same. And it gives you a certain sense of that relief of like, it's fine. It's fine if it didn't work the way it worked at the beginning because you can always change. I really like that. Simon, for folks that want to follow your adventures, where should they go?
Yes, so you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the only social network I do anything on. And I kind of run a kind of blog at simonguest.com. I need to write more articles, but that's also a place where you can get more details on some of the things that we've discussed in today's show.
I really like your post on document driven culture. So that was great on the blog.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure to include the links in the show notes so you don't have to go and search for them. Just look in the description of the video or the blog post or whatever you're listening to this podcast. It's right there. Simon, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you, Dan. It was a pleasure being here.